We are now at 5:05, so I'm going to begin. I hope that's okay for everybody. By way of introduction, my name is Belle Rubiradi. I'm the Member of Parliament for Streatham. I'm also the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on African Reparations. Now, the All-Party Group was launched at the end of last year, and we have brought together parliamentarians from all parties, as suggested, campaigners and community, people from the community and other stakeholders, to have a look at the issue of African reparations with the hope to bringing the debate more into the mainstream, with conversations over the past few years, particularly in regards to Black history and the Black Lives Matter campaign overall. Lots of questions have been raised, although we know that this particular campaign is something which has been discussed over decades. It's very, very important, though, however, that people are speaking about it more in the mainstream, and that we are, with the help of our secretariats, which include Afford, who you'll hear from shortly, are making moves to working with campaigners and stakeholders to discuss the issue and to put forward tangible policies that can lead to reparations, and as a part of that, restitution. And it's really important that we start that discussion now and that we bring it into Parliament, because we know that many of those that in this country in particular refuse or refute the idea of restitution are resting quite heavily on legislation that exists. Just by way of letting you know how the meeting will run, we'll have the various members of the panel speak to you, and then afterwards we will have a question and answer session. If you want closed captions, they are available on the Facebook page, and they have been enabled for that purpose. And if you would like to make any comments, please do put them in the chat. However, if you would like to answer any questions as it's going through, please make sure that you put questions in the question and answer box. I'm going to go now to our first speaker, who's going to be Onyekechi Wambu from Afford, who's going to give some opening remarks to the subject of restitution. Thank you.
Thanks, Belle, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this, the first of the restitution sort of feedback sessions that we will be holding. Afford is an African diaspora organization that works to enhance their contributions to African development. And we've been working with in the All-Party Parliamentary Group on African reparations, and we have been focusing on the restitution element of that. And that reflects the work that we've been doing as part of our Return of the Icons project. And Return of the Icons is what it says on the tin. We've been looking at the issues concerning looted African artifacts that are in museums and other British cultural institutions, and also ancestral remains that are also in many of these institutions. We know, for instance, in terms of the ancestral remains, that you've got at the British Museum the mummy floor, where those remains are still on display. So we're doing work with them. We're really delighted and to be part of supporting the work of the restitution APPG and the reparations APPG, and looking after that restitutions element. We'll be working with Belle over the next year to hold a number of sessions to deepen this work. And as Belle said, it's really important to bring the issues into Parliament. And what we'll be doing is holding a number of hearings, 3 hearings over the next year, looking at different aspects of restitution. The first of this would be the legal hearing. I think it's important to explain to people that as far as the national museums are concerned, the V&A, the British Museum, British Library, that they're not able at the moment to restitute African artifacts because there's legislation in place that prevents them doing that. And the three pieces of legislation that exist are the British Museums Act 1963, the Heritage Act 1983, and the Museums and Galleries Act 1992. So if they are going to be in a position, at the moment they're saying that they can't do this because the legislation forbids them doing that. So part of what we're trying to do is to throw light in this session on the current UK law and the wider international legal and human rights frameworks that have informed past legal challenges for others who have been successful in getting restitution. It's not well known, for instance, that the British Museum has sent back, and there is a law in place, an amendment to some of that legislation that prevents those museums holding Nazi looted material. And if they are any Nazi looted materials in their collections, they have to return it as a result of an amendment. So there are precedents for how those laws can be changed. And the first session that we're going to be holding will be to bring together legal experts, academics, and independent scholars to really look at the law and what flexibility there is, and to also hopefully convince parliamentarians for the need for a further amendment to begin the return of African artifacts. The second hearing is really, before we begin to start returning stuff, the second hearing will focus on some of the challenges that exist around that, which is around understanding what is in the collections in the first place. So second hearing will focus on mapping and provenance, and to work out exactly what collections these institutions hold. Many of them don't know what they have because it's in boxes in the basement. What you see on display in the museums is a fraction of what is in the collection, and they simply don't know what's there. So we wanted to, again, begin to ask the questions about around those issues of how you begin to audit and catalogue what's in the collections. And in this session, presenters will discuss the challenges about location, provenance research, and documentation of African artifacts, and the vital processes that need to be completed to begin returning these artifacts to the communities of origin. And then the final hearing session that we'll be holding would be on documentary heritage. What we've discovered as we've been doing the work since Return of the Archives began in June 2020 is that access to colonial archives and digital records and digital rights are very limited. And so this is really important that people be able to access colonial archives. When the British gave up and retreated from their former colonies, sometimes records were destroyed, sometimes they were removed from the country and returned to the UK, especially around sensitive issues, particularly in relation to Kenya and some of the Mau Mau activity there. And so what we want to, again, look at are those issues of where these archives are, and what steps need to be taken so that people from the former colonies can have access to their own history. And so that session will focus on that, and we really want to bring together members of archivists and other record managers to really explore what can be done in that respect. And as I said, a really crucial part of this is being able to allow Africans to write the histories of their own countries, particularly under the period of British rule. And then secondly, the ownership and distribution of digital rights of the African artifacts in that are held in Western museums is going to be part of this documentary heritage session as well, examining those issues. We're involved in a whole load of other activities outside the framework of APPG, but one that is worth talking about is that the majority of African artifacts are not actually held in the national museums. They're held in the regional museums like Glasgow Museum and the Horniman Museum, these smaller museums around the country in Birmingham, Manchester. And we've been involved in a program called Devolving Restitution, run by the Pitts Rivers Museum in partnership with 6 regional museums, to basically look at what they got in their collections and begin a conversation about how they can return stuff, because it's not bound by the Museums Act, and it's simply a function of the relationship with the Board of Trustees and their own internal governance systems. So we've opened up that conversation. Devolving restitution sessions have been held with Glasgow, with Oxford, Pitts Rivers, with Cambridge Museum, also Manchester Museum, and the next one will be with Derby Museum on June the 8th, and that's looking at restitution and belief. Each of those devolving restitutions are focused on a different aspect, sort of military expeditions and science, because all the different facets of British life were involved in this restitution, the looting and the taking of objects. And this particular one in Derby will focus on belief systems. So we're looking at how sacred objects were taken, the role of missionaries in taking these objects, and beginning to also engage religious institutions who hold a number of these archives as well. I'm going to stop there because I know colleagues have important things to say, but that just gives a range of the work that we're doing. But in particular, the hearings you'll hear more about through Bell as well, with the APPG in the coming 6-7 months. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, and in particular for outlining the stream of work that the Ford is doing specifically for the APPG. So just to explain, we are talking about reparations overall, but we see reparations in a number of different ways, and one of those ways is restitution. We obviously have other campaigns working on what I believe people more typically think of when they think of African reparations in terms of the community aspect and looking at reparations in that manner. And we also have on board some NGOs who want to look at the idea of development and reparations. So those are the 3 main strands at the moment the APPG will be carrying on within. This session is specifically about restitution. And we know that the laws that Onyekechi described are the ones that some are hiding behind, but we also do know that laws change, and so we have every prospect of hopefully being able to amend it in a way that people understand that this can be moved forward. People can actually start to give things back, and just as the idea of reparations shouldn't be alien to all the specific idea of restitution shouldn't be alien to all. We've had situations in the past where reparations have been paid to different countries for different reasons. Speaking about it in the terms of the African diaspora and the transatlantic slave trade shouldn't be a reason for people to just negate the idea. In the same way, we've seen a restitution happen, and actually we're seeing restitution happen right across the world. We've seen France give some things back. We've seen one of those regional museums that Onyekechi described, that the Glasgow Museum look to give some Benin bronzes back. So we are on course, I believe, and I hope that through all of these hearings we get to be able to get a rounded view of what's happening, where things are, and how we can move forward to make sure that things are given back to who they properly belong to. So I'm really pleased to move on to our next speaker, who is Elsie Owusu, who's a very well-known architect of Ghanaian descent. I believe she was the first chair and founder of the Society of Black Architects. Elsie.
No, thank you, Val. I'm really delighted to be here, and it's a privilege to be invited to this meeting. I hope, Oni, you don't mind me quoting back at you your report, Return of the Icons, which says that estimates suggest that 90% of sub-Saharan Africa's historical material and cultural heritage is held outside the continent as a result of colonialization, conquest, plunder, and theft, as well as legitimate trade and exchange. The report continues, calls for return have gained momentum following the groundbreaking Savoie report commissioned by Macron. And as Belle says, the French have started returning treasures to the original custodians from which they were plundered. As a young architect, in 1996, I was working with Bernie Grant and the Africa Reparations movement, and we put forward a competition for a design of a gallery for returning treasures on the assumption that the treasures would be returned to their points of origin. So nearly 25 years later, we then started working on a concept for a new gallery in Kumasi in Ghana. And that was because in the punitive campaign of 1873 to 1874, the Governor General, Sir Garnet Wolseley, led a raid into Kumasi, the ancient capital of the Ashanti Kingdom, in the then Gold Coast, so-called protectorate in West Africa. And the British troops plundered the city, looted large quantities of royal and sacred regalia. For his efforts, the general was granted the freedom of the City of London and awarded a Sword of Honour. And he was also given honours at Oxford and Cambridge universities. And on his return, he was appointed as Inspector General of the Auxiliary Forces. So the rewards were, there were plenty of rewards for people who ventured into the colonies and plundered the sacred regalia. And so the challenge now is to make a pathway for myself as an architect, to make a pathway for the return of the original, of the treasures to the original custodians. And I know that Tristram Hunt at the V&A has recently been to Ghana, and I understand he had a meeting with His Royal Highness, the Asantehene, who's expressed a firm wish for the return of these treasures. I am not a legislator, but I do understand that there are many, many layers to this process, and it will take concerted effort by all of us, architects, legislators, campaigners, and allies in the UK to bring this really important issue of restitution to its proper conclusion.
Thank you very much, Elsie. You're absolutely right. There are a number of different things that need to happen for us to get to this conclusion. A lot of work to do, but where there is a will, there will definitely be a way. So we're campaigning for that will and raising as much awareness about the issue as possible. I'm really pleased to welcome our next panelist, who will be Yvette Abrams. Yvette.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege for me to be here and to be supporting you in your efforts. I'm sitting here in Cape Town, South Africa, and I thought possibly what I could offer you would be the view from the other side, although I'm sure as African diaspora descendants, you absolutely know what it looks like. But let me remind you, and I thought maybe what would help would be for me to inspire you a little by telling you the story of a successful restitution. So I wrote my PhD thesis on Sarah Bartman, whom you might know, otherwise known as the Hottentot Venus, and completed it just about in 2000. And did so in conjunction with a huge Khoisan activist movement around the return of her remains, which at the time were in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. And it was, I suppose, one of these fortuitous circumstances. We had the government completely behind us. So Nelson Mandela actually personally spoke to the French. And delegated specific envoys to go to Paris to negotiate her return. We were fortunate in that, although there is not much archival sources on Sarah Bartman, they were just about sufficient for us to be able to demonstrate that the one thing she would not have wanted to be would be to be exhibited in a museum. So we had an individual, we had an identity, and we had fairly conclusive evidence that she did not wish to be the subject of scientific research. We, like I say, we had the people's movement, and we also had, for a very brief time, a socialist government in France. They were not in power long, I believe it's something like 8 months, but in that 8 months, they did push through in Parliament a specific piece of legislation. It was on the 21st of January 2002, if you want to look it up. And it was worded very specifically. It said, the French Constitution does not allow for slavery. Therefore, nobody can be owned. Therefore, this woman, Sarah Bartman's body must be returned to her country of origin. Now, the fact that the law specifically stated Sarah Bartman made it very restrictive in a sense. There are 4 more Hottentot Venuses in the Musée de l'Homme alone that we haven't been able to get back. And it's starting to look as if we need a specific piece of legislation for each one, because, obviously our feeling is that the principle is the same for everyone. If slavery is illegal, then it's illegal. It means nobody can own those bodies. So can we have them back, please? But because that piece of legislation mentions her name specifically, it's been considered as only applying to her. And yeah, discussions continue. Just to complete my story then, we built a museum for her that is just about finished. It's due to be inaugurated this year, which is 20 years since her burial. And we're really at a standstill as to the exhibitions. Part of me really says, well, I would love an empty center of remembrance with empty walls and empty windows and empty stands to really reflect the fact that for every presence in Europe and Great Britain, there is an absence in Africa. And I'm tempted to figure this absence in a very literal sense. When they sent her body home, they also sent the plaster cast that was made of her shortly before her death. And that is really all we have to exhibit. That and the packing case in which her body came. And like I said, part of me is sorely tempted to have otherwise empty walls. I think it would make a stunning contemporary art exhibition, but would it be heritage work? We're doing the best we can. We're reviving ancient crafts. We're training young trainees. So if nothing else, we are creating new artifacts that hopefully this time we will be able to keep. But obviously, and talks with Monsieur de l'Homme and French government. And if you remember, she spent some time in London as well in Bath. I mean, there are quite possibly artifacts everywhere that we would want. Things like her baptismal certificate that she got in Bath in 2010 and so on. But yes, right now we're sitting with an empty museum, and if it's going to be anything else but an empty museum, then all people are going to have to come to the party. So I'll end on that note, but happy to answer more questions about it.
Thank you very much, Yvette. And I know that there are actually a number of other places that are are there with an empty museum. I was recently speaking to somebody from Egypt, from the new massive museum that's been built there, who are very, very keen to put things in the museum. But in order to do that, there is going to have to be an awful lot of restitution, and in the Egyptians' case, certainly in the context of the British Museum. We're going to move on to our next speaker, and that is Kimanji Ngozi. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, Kimanji. I know that Kimanji is a linguist and a professor of languages formerly from the University of Nairobi in Kenya.
Well, thank you very much, really, for having me today. So I'm Kimani Njogu. I'm based here in Nairobi, and I run, an institution that's an arts, culture, and media institution, Twaweza Communications. And I just want to share with you a couple of things that we have done recently related to the question of restitution. So over the last 1 year, my organization has done 3 things. One, we have done a scoping study on the question of restitution, and we were able to work with researchers from Kenya, from Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Uganda. So the scoping study will be published in the next maybe in the next month or so. And it has some very interesting recommendations, most of which really have to do with Europe taking responsibility, Europe, America, and any of these other powers that colonized Africa taking responsibility for the things that happened on the continent. And again, all the researches basically point to the fact that at every moment of the colonial encounter, Africans resisted the colonial inroads. And in the process, because they were resisting, most of their things were taken away as war booty. And many of those things actually found their way into museums. And the other thing that seems to be coming out of the research really is the importance of developing policy and infrastructural frameworks related to restitution and reparation generally. Ethiopia is doing some interesting work. Already they have an Ethiopian Heritage Restitution Committee, which is starting to work and really providing a pathway for restitution. The other countries that we looked at, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, have not done a lot in this regard, but we think that there is an opportunity with the work that we are doing to get some policy framework in place, as well as deeper understanding of the issues. So the research is really critical. I think it's very, very important work that we have done recently. The other thing that we've done recently relates to collecting stories, especially from journalists from across Africa. We have collected stories from Egypt, from Algeria, Ghana, Nigeria, Zambia, across Africa, really, many countries in Africa, on the whole question of restitution. And the reason we wanted the media involved was because they play a critical role in shifting narratives. And we wanted to bring in the question of restitution as a media agenda. And so many journalists, for the first time, found things that they didn't know existed related to restitution in their communities. And therefore, that was very important for us. And we have published the stories as part of our shifting narratives about cultural heritage in Africa. The most recent activity which took place about 3 weeks ago is a symposium that I organized on decolonization and cultural heritage, and I'm really grateful that Onyeka Chiwamu was able to participate as a panelist from the UK. And the question of restitution again was discussed as part of the decolonization agenda that is being driven by Africa as well as by other players globally. So these three activities have really highlighted to me, and also, of course, the people that we work with, that we need to put in place a number of things. The first thing that we do need to do, and again, this has come out very, yes, the symposium was recorded and is available, and we'll share the link briefly, just to indicate that there is need for a very elaborate inventory of the restitution concerns that Africa is making. And without such an inventory, it will be very, very difficult for us to know what exists where. And so we are saying, especially those of us who are based in Africa, that we do need to build partnerships and collaborations with our colleagues based in the global north on this question of building an inventory. The other concern that has been, again, critical for us is the prioritization of things. I mean, it's totally incomprehensible that spiritual things are still being held in museums abroad, whereas we know that in Africa, the communities are composed of those who have not arrived, those that is the unborn who are still coming, those that are here, and those that have departed. Those that have departed are still part of the community. And when we have situations where some of our people are actually located in the global north, that is totally unacceptable. Therefore, in the process of prioritizing, I think that the sacred pieces would be really, really urgent and critical. Just to also mention that we are focused also on urging East African governments to ratify the UNESCO conventions that have a bearing on restitution. So we are working with government, at least in the case of Kenya. We are reaching out to the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, and we've been working with them to ensure that we have some ratification on the key conventions, the 1970 convention, and other conventions that are really critical for restitution. And also really to build a body of knowledge about these issues by working directly with the communities so that they also know what belongs to them and where it is located. So really, these are some of the things that we are doing, and I think that the discourse is gaining momentum in East Africa. There is a huge connection now with our colleagues in West Africa, and we are trying to reach out to the diaspora so that this becomes really a strong Pan-African agenda that we can work with. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you some of these reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kimani, for your contribution. I'm looking forward to hearing from you in the question and answer session, which we will begin shortly. Please do drop any questions that you might have for the panel into the chat, and we'll attempt to get through all of them as quickly as possible, going around and asking all the panelists to give further contributions. Where we stand at the moment in terms of what the country or what government ministers have said from a UK perspective is, yes, there's the issue of the Museums Act. We've also heard certain inferences that the reason why it's good to keep these artifacts in places like the British Museum is because people from all over the world can now come and see them in said British Museum. Now, I don't know about any of you, if you even attempted to get a family member even over for a wedding or a funeral recently. The bill which I'm going to leave to vote for at some point is going to make this situation even worse in terms of immigration. So the idea that people can freely come and see artifacts in a British museum is ridiculous. Another thing that we've heard recently is, yes, there's a lot of talk about this, but what we'll do is we'll loan them back to the countries that have requested them. So the whole concept that you have stolen my property, but I will loan it to you, and you can borrow it for a little period of time, but it remains in my ownership. That's another one that has been floated. And the final one, and perhaps not that the other two are not insulting, one of the most insulting is that the reason why they have to stay in countries like the UK and places like the British Museum is because people in the countries that they originate from engage in activities such as theft or will not be able to take good care of them. So these are some of the arguments that we have been unfortunately up against, and sadly people say these things with a very straight face, and you know that they absolutely mean it. So I'm going to go into some of the questions that people have asked now. First one I have is Digital Benin is a good example of gathering what might be where. Are there any examples of that either the panelists are aware of? I'll start with you, Onyekachi, because you spoke first.
Yeah, I mean, what's been amazing about the current restitution campaigns is that it's really kind of reinvigorated the museum sector across Africa, and not just the museum sector, but also, you know, just cultural responses across the continent. So each country now has different initiatives that are ongoing that are trying to look again at these iconic pieces, how we use them, how we relate to them, how we use them for development, how we use them to modernize, to move forward. So there's a lot of really interesting activity going on, both on the digital level and also in terms of, as Yvette said earlier on, building new museums. There's one museum I'm aware of, Pan-African World Heritage Museum in Ghana, and they just began construction or with the groundbreaking, and that museum will go up. It will focus on the African diaspora, and they're looking obviously to see if they can also enter into the conversations about getting some of this material back to reflect the breadth and of global African kind of genius and creativity. They are about to start that initiative as a digital museum, initially while the concrete museum is still being built. Before he passed last year, unfortunately, the great Runoko Rashidi gifted 250,000 of his photographs that he did as a, you know, sort of a document of global Africa, in Asia, in Europe, you know, in Africa and everywhere else. And he's gifted 250, his collection basically of 250,000 of these photographs to the museum. And so they're going to be launching a number of initiatives that will digitize them and then begin to really talk about how we then share this and how we use this as for learning and also to move ourselves forward. It was really important today, and I'll just finish with this, to hear the voices from Yvette and Kimani on the continent, because this needs to be a collaborative kind of initiative with all of us working together across and ensuring that we learn from each other and the initiatives that are taking place. So it's been really powerful hearing the voices from Cape Town and also from Nairobi in terms of what's been going on there. But I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Elsie?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the technical innovations are really important, and digitization is obviously really important. And we've learned a lot about digital twinning and how to create, if you like, digital copies and digital records of these artifacts, and that's really important. But I think the thing to emphasize is that the physical presence, the physical reality of these sacred objects in their original place of custody, and the return of that is the return of these items to the continent is really very important, because they're not just museum pieces, they are sacred objects, many of them, which were placed in the custody of the original custodians and have a significant spiritual meaning to the culture and the place of origin. So yes, I think it's, you know, really fantastic and very important to make digital twins, both of buildings and of objects. But I think it's really important to hang on to the importance of the physical return and restitution.
Thank you very much, Elsie. Yvette?
Thank you. I'm trying not to get distracted by the gaslighting, so I'm not going to address the comments that you made. Look, my experience is digital is great. It's really opened up a whole new world. It's made the globe accessible in a wonderful way. But it has a downside, and the downside is that digital is only available insofar as you have data. If you don't have money for airtime, then there's a universe that you are excluded from. So I don't think digital is necessarily the answer to popular education in Africa. I think it's a beautiful thing in and of itself, but it doesn't remove the necessity to have physical spaces that people can walk to and be educated. I think particularly where digital has, of course, its biggest limitations is in terms of human remains. And it is chaos out there. I mean, we have South African museums with, you know, thigh bone number 505 that was brought there by some evil archaeologist in 1942. And we now, under our local legislation, are obliged to try and find a descendant community or somebody to bury this thigh bone. Those are the complicated cases. But we can't shy away from the work. For some people, particularly the skulls of the Namibian genocide that are kept in German museums, the number, as you know, the Khoisan, the South African indigenous, I think we've been the world's biggest supplier of human bodies to the heritage sector worldwide. These are people's relatives. I'll never forget the miscast exhibition in 1996 when somebody came to say, "That's my auntie. That body there is my auntie." Now, you know, digital is not going to address that sorrow and that grief. So they're great. They have their space, but there are many other spaces that only the physical return can address.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Unfortunately, my first bell has gone, and I'm expecting up to 12 more. I hope to be back in between, but I'm going to hand over to Janice, who I believe is going to finish up with the questions in my stead. Janice, are you able to come on?
Onikachi is happy to chair, but I'm happy to field some questions to Onikachi that are unanswered. So perhaps if we could start with the first one, is how can the public help in the campaign to bring about legal changes regarding museums' legal ownership? Does anybody on the panel want to answer that or address that question?
Yeah, I can pick that. I think that the first point of work really is the community, because these items really do belong to communities. They are stories about communities. They are stories about community experiences and histories and tensions and connections and so on. And really this whole work, this work is not technical work. it is very also emotive. It is about humanizing the world, really telling the story that you cannot steal things from me, and then you put conditions around the return of that which you have stolen from me. I mean, this is very basic logic. I mean, and therefore I think that communities would really be the first stakeholder to really drive this process. And I think it's basically community organizing, working with researchers, working with academia, working with media, working with civil society, working with the politicians, you know, really. And that it is this collaborative engagement that will make it possible for us to have a legal framework that serves, you know, all of us, that is just, that is fair, that is restorative, restitutive, that dignifies humankind. So I think that it's this collaborative work, Janice, that is required. And I think that communities would be at the center of this work, and that those of us who are researchers or, you know, or creators of things support communities in this endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, I agree absolutely with that. I think one of the interesting things for me is that when I first started talking to the Africa Reparations movement, I had no clue about the extent of the theft, if you like, and what beautiful artifacts were kept in all sorts of obscure places, in basements, attics. And so where I do think digitization can help is just simply in getting the word around about these, you know, beautiful objects which have been stripped. The wealth in intellectual and in terms of material that has been stripped from countries which are now, and cultures which are now described as impoverished, and they're not impoverished actually. And it's the understanding of the wealth of resource that, you know, if I can speak about Ghana, where, you know, working in Ghana, where people in the gold mining areas are so poor, and yet, you know, somebody said to me the other day, Ghana has no gold reserves. Well, you know, that's an extraordinary thing to say for a country which has probably more gold reserves than any other place in the world. A lot of it in the ground, but much of it in the UK. So getting the word back, helping people to understand this is your heritage, you know, and it's here, and making that accessible will foster enthusiasm for people to put pressure on MPs and put pressure on legislators and say, you know, it is important that this is returned. So I think part of it is building up a head of steam and strategizing to get the word out. And I'm not, you know, I'm not that sort of strategist, but as Oni said, you know, that collaboration between the technicians and the creative and cultural industries and people who do press and PR and the legislators is absolutely key to getting this right.
Thanks. Yvette, did you want to respond to any of that?
I can just no, absolutely. I mean, I think community activism was a huge factor in our success. But and also in the broader sense, you know, I can think of particularly the Griqua, for instance, who spent years lobbying with the ANC government around return of Sarah Bartman. But of course, you know, they'd all been comrades in the same struggle very recently. And so we had that headwind also in our sails. You know, we had, in a sense, a very progressive government that had just come from being community activists. And so you know, that opened their ears, and that made sure that we got every possible cooperation we could have wished for from government side. So I do think you can't underestimate the role of community activism. I once had a job for 5 years that involved reporting to Parliament, and the one thing I noticed, the one thing that politicians do listen to is media, and that's because they believe that media is an indication of which way the vote's going to go. So if something was in the morning paper, when I came to do a reporting session, the first thing the MP would say would be, explain this thing to me that was in the paper. So that kind of activism, I think, is always important.
Thank you. There are a number of questions on that issue of community activism that I'll group that extend that issue. Somebody asked about, has raised the issue that next year is the 30th anniversary of the Abuja Conference and the formation of the African Reparations movement. How can communities in the UK work together to make sure that current generations are aware of the going on of those campaigns? And then Maxine, we could seek to link some of this, because I think there are linkages between them. Maxine has also asked, in practical terms, can a petition be produced to galvanize support to get discussion in Parliament? And again, Yvette, I think it goes back to that point you made. If people are reading about this stuff in the press, then they tend to sit up. And then there was another question about, how do speakers propose dealing with artifacts in private citizens' homes? So I'll deal with, since I'm doing this dual role, I'll deal with that last question first. I think with this issue of reparations and restitution, it's such a huge battlefield in a way that's, it's important to look at what I call the low-hanging fruit and begin there and then build the momentum. There is so much that is in government and public institutions that we need to address, and that is actually much easier to begin that conversation around than trying to work out what is in private collections. Sometimes when these Benin bronzes are sold, they just disappear and you don't know who's got them. And trying to track all of that down is a big piece of work, whereas we know that it's possible to go to the British Museum and for them to catalogue what they have in their collections, and you can get quite a lot back from that alone, and all the other museums that exist. So I would say that in terms of the issues about artifacts in private citizens' homes, I would say that that's the next campaign. What people are doing around that private areas, that people are now looking out at the auction houses, and every time something comes onto the market at Sotheby's or other institutions, demonstrations have taken place. Auction houses have been contacted privately to stop the sale happening, and the Ethiopians were actually able to last year get some of the artifacts back through those means, some of the religious artifacts back through those means, where they petitioned the auction house, the sellers, where the sale was then halted. They got into a conversation with the people who were selling the objects, and at the end of that, a deal was done and the items were saved. So there are a number of strategies in relation to that. But I'll go back to my colleagues on that broader question about the petition to galvanize support in Parliament, and also what do we do around key moments in the history of restitution, like the formation of the African Reparation movements by Bernie Grant, and next year is the 30th anniversary, and also the Abuja conference. Okay, Kimani, do you want to take
just very briefly. I think that these problems are normally solved through multiple approaches. So the petition is one, I think, critical approach where communities actually participate in petitioning and signing off and really putting pressure on the politicians. But I think that alongside the petition, there ought to be additional work by reaching out to the various allies within the political class, in media, and building the knowledge around that particular issue. So I think that the petition, though it's a critical component of changing legislation and policy and so on, it needs to be supported by other work. And that other work sometimes gets done silently in deep consultation, in deep reflection, and so forth. Not to suggest that the petition is not driven by that. So I just wanted to make that comment. I also think that the whole question of messaging is critical, that we build uniformity or even general consensus on the type of messaging that we are sending out there in terms of the changes that we would like to see in legislation, including, in fact, developing model legislation that speaks to the interests that we are championing. So that's my short input, Onyeka.
Well, if I can just interject, I think that the churches are really, really important to this. I mean, I think that the faith groups and particularly the Black-led churches, I think, are absolutely key to the success of this. The Black churches are such fantastic activist organizations, highly organized, and great networks, right down to the fact of Sunday schools, and getting this message to the children, the next generations. So I think that involvement of the churches, the Black-led churches, the Methodist churches, the Anglican churches, a key figure, I think, would be someone like Bishop Rose, and the Black hierarchy in the churches. I think if we could, if they were to become involved and to become part of the leadership of this campaign, I think that would be a great step in the right direction.
Thank you. Yvette, did you have any feedback to make? An additional question has been asked about what role are the AU and other African regional bodies playing in this. So if you're able to share any information on that, that would be appreciated.
I think the AU is critical. I think, as one of the previous speakers said, the extent that we're able to operate on a pan-African level, only strengthens our case. I think the more united we are, obviously, the stronger we're going to be. I guess, and again, going by the South African experience, one just has to be careful not to expect too much too quickly. I mean, we've been doing this work for 25 years and we're barely getting, we're still fighting over packing cases. So don't get your hopes up for quick results. But that said, yes, no, of course, we've got to do the work and we've got to do it systematically and we've got to do it well.
Okay. Thank you. A question was asked about media, and if there's a place for the Global African Congress to share information. Just as a point of information, we at Afford, we have a Facebook page called Return of the Icons, where we try and share information about restitution related issues. So, I mean, that's one forum. There are others out there as well, but I've shared the link for that. So in terms of that question, people can go there. And then Wangui, sorry, it was Wangui who asked a question about the AU and the African world in general, which has been answered. I know that the AU, last year, a number of presidents came together. There were 12 presidents with most of the countries that have big collections. So Egypt was there, Nigeria, Ethiopia, South Africa was there, Mali, Kenya, and they have formed a group to look at these issues of heritage and also restitution. So it is gathering momentum, and the AU, through its ECOSOC, Economic and Social Affairs Council, is also beginning to now galvanize a position on this so that it can convene all the different African countries around on this particular issue. So there's a lot of movement that is going on, and the AU now is beginning to integrate this as part of its African Agenda to 2063, which at the end of that, by 2063, they want to see an African Renaissance on the continent. And of course, if there's going to be a Renaissance, these artifacts will represent the naissance that we want to begin to animate for the Renaissance. So there's a lot of work that is going on there. I think what is coming through is that there needs to be so much more just in terms of coordinating these different initiatives that are going on. And then again, that point that was made by the Global African Congress about a media platform so that this information can be shared from what's going on in the diaspora and also what's going on the continent. There's another question on the UN World Conference Against Racism, the Durban Declaration and the Program of Action, point 158 of the restitution of artifacts. I think that was just a point of information. From your end, Kimani, and also Yvette, what would be your needs from collaboration with the diaspora? How can the diaspora and the different organizations here really support the work that you're doing? And then how also can you feedback to us here in terms of making this a feedback loop that works effectively? Yvette, why don't you go first?
Thank you. I'm slightly taken aback because people very seldom ask me what I need. I guess communication, I mean, the series of webinars is really helpful, even for me in Africa, to find out what they're doing in Kenya or what they're doing in West Africa, and even more so what's happening in the diaspora. So I think platforms for communication where we can, just exchange news, we can exchange tactics, we can talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and so on. That's the networking, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for. That's really important. Other than that, it really does seem to me as if you're doing all the right things. You're serious, you're committed, you've worked out your campaign, you're working from community level to parliament level. So there's really not much more I can add to that. I'm happy to send you a list of Sarah Bartman's possessions that are still in Britain. If you'd like. I think this inventory that you've done is just so beautiful. And sometimes, you achieve success in big strokes, but sometimes you literally do it artifact by artifact. And so there might be a value in us in Africa saying, well, of that whole inventory, you know, here are the things that we'd like first. These are kind of the first priorities, and then we'll get to the others later. That might be some kind of idea to just divide up the inventory so that apart from the broad general strategic, we're actually doing work literally item by item, because sometimes that also pushes struggles forward.
Somebody just asked, and I'm going to stick with you for a little while, Yvette, because somebody just posted and said, you know, we've been mainly discussing, you know, artifacts and human rights from the British imperialism, and they wanted to know about, you know, the German or the French, and I know that you obviously have done a lot of some work with Namibia and the Germans. Are you able to share any of that work at all?
I'm happy to share, but even happier to say that in actual fact, I've done absolutely none of that work. It's a whole new younger generation that were inspired by the Sarah Bartman return and began a set of negotiations with the German government and with German museums. And that is always pleasant for an old activist to say. You know, it's always beautiful to be able to say, actually, I did squat. I've merely sat on the sidelines and observed, and a beautiful generation has taken it forward. So you know, that's always a lovely moment to linger. I guess what I can share, one of these young people, Memory Biwa, who amongst many other things is the first woman of genocide descent to ever write a history of the genocide. I mean, she's a famous historian in her own right, but she sent me this this image of a tortoiseshell mat from the Ethnographical Museum in Berlin, and she sent it to me just the day that I was about to start my book on the genocide, and it's now going to be my front cover. But just how a material artifact can be so important in terms of inspiration, in terms of belonging. Sometimes it clicks a missing link into place. And I mean, I don't want to go too far into the history of this particular tortoiseshell mat, but one of the things that it does is it exemplifies traditions of patchwork that are so old that they go back prior to the genocide. It's a missing link. And so to be able to see this physical evidence of this link and to say, well, that pre-colonial tradition became post-colonial, and where we see the change is this mat. I guess what I'm consistently trying to gesture to is the fact that it's not just a bunch of artifacts lying around Europe and Britain. It's missing knowledge. There are gaps, there are lacunae this side in Africa. My metaphor of the empty museum, and sometimes just an image of an artifact can solve so many problems for you. And so that inventory that you have, what it symbolizes in a different way, it symbolizes the knowledge that we don't have this side. And I think it's important to continually emphasize it.
Thanks very much. I'll hand back to Belle, who's back with us.
I do expect another vote, but so I'm back briefly, so maybe handing back over to you again. But I thought it might be useful seeing some of the questions go by to see if any I might be helpful. So I know that somebody asked about a petition, galvanizing support via a petition. I think that's a very good idea. If you get a certain number of people to sign up to said petition, then it guarantees a debate in Parliament, which I think could be very useful specifically on this subject. I do think we might be able to get a certain number of people, which might be good, because one thing that people don't know is that over the subject matter to receive the most signatures for a parliamentary petition over a few different petitions. Actually, I think it was about 4 or 5 petitions. But the subject matter to receive the most signatories was that of teaching Black history in schools. obviously the government have not then complied and made sure that Black history is being taught in schools. But I think it's very interesting to find that this is what most people have signed a parliamentary petition about in this country. And I can see Alexandra asked about a representative from the DCMS coming along. And what I would just say about that is that we do hope to invite them to future meetings to answer certain questions. But I think as you suggest, it's very, very important that we're bringing people together at the moment, making sure that we have all the facts, we have all the figures, we have all the community behind us, and then go to various people in government, make sure we're giving a very clear and concise view as to what we are asking for and how exactly we're asking for it. That is another bell. I'll switch off so that you don't have to hear it, and I'll be back again.
Okay, good luck. Thank you. Kimani, just to pick up on the last question, which you didn't get an opportunity to answer, about your needs from that end, and then Elsie, also, what would the needs be from Africa? But Yvette, we will follow up about Sarah Batman's possessions to see about how we get those home. So, Kimani.
Yeah. Yes, and that is precisely where I begin. We do need to work together to locate certain things that communities would like to take possession of. And we do not know where those things are. So I know that there is a family, a Maasai family, that has been looking for a particular spear that was taken away. The spear was taken away because this Maasai gentleman speared a district commissioner Grant, who had taken over his very special bull. And the man was like, I can give you any bull, not take this one. This bull is like my child. He was so attached to it. And eventually, of course, it's a long, long story. And there are many stories like those that I receive every day. We need information related to what the Germans did during the Maji War in Tanzania. And the things they took a lot of things during the Maji War, 1905, 1907. And there are also communities on the Kenyan coast that are also asking for their things. One of the stories that we've published recently is from Mozambique about images that are located in Portugal. So I think that the part of the partnership that would be really critical for us is the collaboration in terms of locating things that communities are looking for as we build the inventory. I also think that the other area is that sometimes we would, I think collaborative projects, because we are taking a very, a global Pan-African diasporic approach. And I think that we do need to see the convergences, the historical convergences, and to be able to develop joint projects, even if those projects are about knowledge production, about knowledge on the particular issues. Because again, once we know the value of the products, that would be critical. I also think that one area which is really important for us and which we are trying to grapple with is the decolonization of the museum, because the current museums found still have so much of the colonial feel. And so the deeper reflection, again, collective reflection on how does a truly African museum that tells the histories and the experiences of the African people look like, and where is it located, and how does it become accessible and so on. So this imagination of almost a futuristic imagination will also be an important one for us. So for me, I have so many requests, my brother. I don't know whether you can take 10% of those, but I think that there is a tremendous opportunity. Just look at how over the last 1 month, you and I have interacted, after 20 years of not connecting, and then we connect on this issue. So I think these are the very deliberate connections that are required for us to move this thing forward. So the building of community and bringing all these ideas together. So that's my response to it. And just again to answer the question that I think Yvette responded to, we are reaching out to Francophone Africa. I mean, it's not that we are no longer talking about, those of us who experienced the British imperialism, but also looking at our colleagues who experienced other forms of imperial expansionism. And so the British, the Portuguese, and I think we still also need to look at Middle East. We haven't looked at the Middle East. I think we need to look a little at the Middle East and what may have happened during the periods when the Arabs also did work on Africa.
Okay, thank you. Before I come to you, Elsie, I'll just make a couple of announcements that have been in the chat box from Global African Congress. They'll be holding a lobby of Parliament on the 15th June, Wednesday, 15th June, after Prime Minister's questions. So if you are interested, please look in the chat box for contact details for Glenroy Watson, who's the secretary. Also, the RMT Black Solidarity Committee are having its annual reparations conference on the 23rd of August. So Judy Richards has posted that, saying that this is one of many opportunities for us to meet, update each other and work together. And this year's event will be a hybrid event, so you can, I guess, participate both on Zoom and in person. Elsie, what are your needs from the continent? Let's start with where we are in terms of our colleagues here.
Well, I suppose enthusiasm, really. I mean, I think that you kind of mentioned the idea of what used to be called low-hanging fruit, and I just see so many ways that people are enlivening debate. The way that young people are using TikTok, for instance, the way that people are coming up with creative ideas for just sharpening up the debate. And I think that if we were to engage younger people, particularly people who are, young students in the creative industries. I mean, I was doing some work with University of the Arts in London, and the things that they came up with, were just fantastic. And so I think that level of engagement to me is really important, because I see these campaigns, the crowdfunding campaigns, the GoFundMe campaigns, that when people really get a grip of an issue, they just begin to come up with ideas which are so interesting and so passionate and so kind of eye-catching. But it just seems to me that this is a kind of very worthy, but in a sense quite old-fashioned way of getting the news across. So I just would like it opened up. I would like it opened up. Facebook is great. I would like to see more use of TikTok, more use of the other social media to get that message across, because young people on the continent are engaged with these new forms of media as well. And I'd love to see a conversation between young people in the diaspora, allies in the diaspora, and just to say to people, look, this is what we're talking about. Have a look at this. This isn't just an issue. It is, of course, it's an issue, and that's important. But just look at this beautiful thing. This is what we're talking about. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I hear you on that, and I think there's one thing. I'm just listening to you talking there about wanting these artifacts back, and then the other thing about what do they mean to us still, and it seems to me that those kinds of campaigns can begin to really animate the meaning for us on how we intend to use them for whatever purposes, for development, for creativity, for relearning old techniques, for making material or responding artistically. So yeah, I can see that conversation would really be important. Think Alexandra Ankara has asked a point. Think the Future Museum, Kimani, very important. My daughter, Dr. Rebecca Misa, is a joint artistic director of a major art centre in the heart of the UK's oldest Black community in Liverpool. Our links to Liverpool are 100 years old. How do we navigate rights to keep work in our community, given our community heart is here in the UK, versus the right to return to the old country, Gold Coast? So I guess it's about, in a way you've answered that, Elsie, haven't you, which is about getting these conversations going. I don't know if anybody wanted to add to that at all.
Well, I mean, I think that this is really important, because I think that once we establish ownership, once we establish the rightful custodians and where these objects, if you like, where they should reside, then I think, there's all sorts of things that we can do in terms of sharing, sharing the information, sharing the locations. But I suppose the thing that makes me quite nervous is that without clear a clear sense of ownership, rightful ownership, I just get quite nervous about whether they're going to keep going astray. I mean, I remember once Bernie Grant arranged a meeting with the uncle of the Oba of Benin, and for some reason he couldn't make it. That's probably because he was voting. But I ended up taking this meeting with somebody from the British Museum, and they said, no, we have a really wonderful idea. We can make a duplicate of this incredibly precious object, and we can, at our own cost, and we can give you that duplicate in perpetuity. And the Oba of Benin's uncle said, well, I have an even better idea. Why don't you keep the duplicate and we will have the original? And that didn't seem to go down too well. So I think that, there's lots of obfuscation which is possible to happen. So in a sense, I think, if we say this object belongs there, we'll, happy to loan you a copy, but I'm just really keen to focus on this sense of rightful ownership and custodian. Well, for me, it's really important. The Ghanaian artifacts are particularly important, but I'm sure that that might apply to others as well.
Yeah, and that's also the challenge with the loans, because the artifacts won't be loaned unless you agree that the British own them. So there have been lots of ideas floated around about long-term loans, and again, that's a very dangerous trap, I believe. There are three questions that I'm just going to go to very quickly. One, and any one of the panel can take them. How do we guarantee that these artifacts are kept well when they're returned? And then the second question is, how is the APPG using UN processes and frameworks such as the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination or the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, and various world conferences against racism to ensure the return of artifacts? And then a final question. No, let's deal with those two first.
Well, the first one being how do we make sure they're well looked after?
Yes.
Well, I think that's a sort of one of those issues which, yes, is important, but you know, if you it's kind of part of the argument, the where will it all end type of argument. I mean, you know, we've had this conversation going on about the Parthenon marbles, where people have said, how are we going to be sure that these items are going to be looked after? Well, you know, you have the most fabulous facilities, you know, purpose-made, built at vast expense in Greece, curated by the best curators in the world, looked after in the best possible way. And people are still saying, well, how are we going to be sure that the Parthenon marbles are looked after when they get back? So I don't really think, I mean, I recognize that there's a concern, but I really don't think the concern is about keeping, you know, keeping the items in good order. I think it's really, you know, where will it all end, you know, and we're not going to have anything left in our museum, and we're all going to go to hell in a handcart kind of moral panic. So I think there are fantastic museums all over Africa, all over the continent. There are great designers, there are great builders. So I think that conversation is a technical one. This is not a technical conversation. This is really a political and moral conversation.
Thank you. Kimani, you're on the ground. How are your museums protecting and looking after your artifacts?
Well, first of all, is to say that products were originally in Africa in the first place, and they were taken care of before they were taken away, before they were shipped, looted or taken away. So they were well kept by the communities. I find it very strange that suddenly they have more value elsewhere and less value to the communities that owned them in the first place. I think that the communities that owned them in the first place see them as much more valuable because it's like they are getting their possessions back. And I think that even if, so the communities get to decide what it means to keep them well. So the communities actually get to decide that. If the communities decide that they need to be kept in the museum and they have access to the museum, then in fact, they will be richer. Because to the extent that these artifacts are located in Europe, the story around those products is minimal. It's not deep enough. It's only when those products come back home that the story becomes substantial, becomes deeper. So I think that I would not really be too worried about them being kept well. I mean, in our case, we have devolved government. So we have the national government. So we have the National Museums of Kenya, which is huge, and it has a lot of our staff. But we have also devolved culture to the counties. So the counties will also be putting up their own, museums and their own spaces where refugees can actually come and view. Also, there are also community museums. I mean, there are spaces where communities keep their things. I believe that that should not be such a big problem. With regard to the use of the United Nations mechanisms, yes, we must use the mechanisms. We must use global mechanisms, Pan-African mechanisms, regional economic commissions, and national mechanisms. So we have to use all these mechanisms to facilitate the debate. So I completely agree that the UN framework is also an important framework for us to use.
Thank you. Yvette, did you want to respond to the question about the preservation in the museums? I mean, you've just built the Sarah Bartman Museum.
Yes, no, I absolutely do want. Oh, sorry. Well, no, I was going to address the first question first.
Okay, go on.
If that's okay.
Please.
Because my counter question would be, how well are you looking after them now? And I will give you the example that somewhere between 1983 and 1987, the Musée de l'Homme lost Sarah Bartman's brain. Or at least when a particular researcher inquired, they stated, we don't have her brain. And so we were forced to go back and say, but in 1816, you possessed the brain. This author went to the Musée de l'Homme in 1973 and saw the brain because it was still on exhibit. So how between 1973 and 1983 do you manage to lose a part of Sarah Bartman's body? And we literally had to prove to them that that brain is there for them. Then they go, oh, we found it, So by 2000, there's somewhere around there, they found it. We didn't want to do DNA testing because, as I said, our theory was that she would not have liked invasive testing. But so to this day, we still cannot tell you that the body and the skeleton and the private parts all come from the same body. I mean, how do you trust a museum that loses the brains but not the genital parts? And then they find them again. So don't get me started. That tortoiseshell mat is now disintegrated. The image that I have is about 10 years old. And I really think Kimani's got it when he points out the importance of context. Sometimes the shield only makes sense next to the spear. The headdress only has a specific meaning when it's together with the mask. Part of needing to assemble these things back in Africa in their social context is so that we can understand fully the knowledge that is embedded in these material objects. And I think that's something that people often miss when they think, okay, here's a spear in a museum case, and they think when it gets back to Africa, that's what. No, we're going to have to do a whole, it's kind of like doing a 1,000-piece puzzle, but backwards. We're going to have to do a whole matching and try and realigning particularly ritual objects with a particular ritual context before the entire sphere of knowledge becomes available to us. So this is not about something sitting in a case somewhere. This is about reclaiming our heritage in a very much broader sense. So now I've forgotten the second question, but thank you very much for being here. I had to get that said.
No, that's fine. We're going to move towards the close. We've got about 10 more minutes. And what we will try and do is next time Belle's able to join us from the division, we'll ask her to sum up and then we can close the meeting formally with her in the chair. But I thought just in terms of the final sort of set round of questions to ask everybody, and it was just, there are a lot of priorities both in diaspora communities here. We know we're about to go through a cost of living crisis that is coming up that is going to impact us all over the next year. Inflation is horrendous. On the African continent, lots of other challenges. Why is this issue of restitution of cultural artifacts particularly worth pursuing for you at this moment, given all the other priorities? Kimani, do you want to go first, and then Elsie, and then Yvette? And
I think that, again, these issues are interconnected. So for me, the question of restitution is about giving dignity to our people. When people feel disconnected from their history, from their past, from their creations, when they are denied points of reference to even imagine what is possible because of erasure and a certain sense of economic opportunism, surely it is worth pursuing. So for me, it's how do we bring back dignity to and build connection with our history. I mean, I do research sometimes, and I look at our prehistoric, the pre-colonial period, and I just can't get enough information for inspiration, because most of that information, either in the form of documents or whatever, was shipped away, and I have to get a visa to travel to do research about my own community. So despite the fact that we have a lot of other challenges, this issue of restitution is about dignity, is about giving our people back the confidence they can walk around the world, because standing on solid ground, a solid ground that was shaken by the building of empire. That is important for me. And I think that I will continue doing this work. I think it's so important. But we do not do it in isolation. We do it as part of the decolonization. And I think there is even a bigger responsibility to bring sanity and comfort in Europe, to the extent that they are holding other people's things at peace, because our ancestors are restless in their homes, in their museums, apartments. Our ancestors are trying to come back home, and therefore some of the abilities that we experience out there are really about our people trying to come back home. Therefore, this is important for us. I think we do need to invest in it, and we do need to again work together to make this happen.
Thank you, Kimani. We'll go to West Africa now, to Elsie. Why is this? So we move east to west.
Well, I suppose for me, it's a process of empowerment, and the process itself is important. The artifacts are very important, but the process of retrieving the artifacts and understanding why they're important is is key to understanding who I am as an African. And unless this project is achieved in the right way, we are constantly going to believe this fiction that Africa is a continent populated by people with handy begging bowls. And that story, that fiction, has got to end. And this is part of the process, a very important part of the process of ending that fiction. Just to pick up this question, I mean, it is not good for people to live as purveyors of stolen goods. Part of the fiction is, well, these goods aren't actually stolen. They are, and then you create a fiction about why your ancestors, as Bernie used to say, them teeth your ting. And then you have to explain why you need it back. And for the comfort, both of the people who have been victims of this theft and plunder, and for the people who have been the recipients of the stolen goods. This process and the restitution and the coming to terms with that history has to come to a proper conclusion. And that's why I've been involved ever since I discovered it was going on in 1992 or whenever it was. It's just been a compelling part of my life and career. So it's an important process of empowerment, but it's also an important process of coming to terms with our shared history.
Okay, well, thank you, Elsie. And Yvette, we're going south now.
Thank you. It's really hard to add to what my two previous colleagues have said. They've really hit the nail on the head. I guess the only thing that I can really add is, in the same way that we seek reparations for the genocide, I mean, we want to make sure that it never ever happens again. And the best way to make sure that it never happens again, the next person that tries to steal artifacts from Africa needs to be thinking, you know what? They made us give it back last time, so there might not be that much of a point in stealing it a second time. And we have mainly Roman Dutch law, but we've inherited very much of British common law. And as far as I understand, theft is a crime that never prescribes, ever. So, the important part of applying the law, as any other legal person would say, is to make sure that the next person doesn't do it. There's a deterrent effect.
Thank you, Yvette. And Belle, before I hand back to you, I thought I'd just take the opportunity to say why, for me, this matters, and then we'll hand back to you to try and wrap up. But, some people may have heard me say this story before, but there's also an economic dimension. I went to Ghana for the year of return, and we, during that period in December, there was a lot going on. A lot of diaspora people had come back, so a heritage offer that the Ghanaian government had put out there, and Ghana was a big diaspora party town. And but in amongst all the partying, we went to the castles and had that terrible experience of what happened before people embarked on the Middle Passage and the loss, and reliving all of that. And a lot of people from the Caribbean and from the Americas became, and also myself, we became very emotional. And then you leave that, and it's with you for 2 days at least, and you're trying to say, well, what else was going on in Ghana before all of this? And so you go to the local museum, and of course, there isn't much in there, because most of the really priceless pieces are in the West. And so there was this idea also of, Ghana was able to attract 1.5 million visitors during that period of the year of return. According to the Treasury in Ghana, Minister of Finance, they generated $1.8 billion, which was second or third to cocoa and gold exports. So this was a big economic issue, and if you're going to develop a heritage tourism business that offers to the African diaspora, having these items back to be in their center places in the museums is really, really important. So, for me, that's another, I agree with everything colleagues have said about the importance of this in terms of our agency, in terms of our recovery of our identities, but that other dimension is something that we should also talk about, because it can be part of a really important offer to the African diaspora in terms of the African world reconnecting itself again. Belle, to you. I know you're going to rush off again, but I thought we're probably near the end of the meeting now for you to wrap up.
Thank you very much. The trick will be to do this before the bell makes a very annoying noise for all of you, but thank you so much to afford particular leading on this strand of work as part of the APPG. I think it's very, very key, I think, to show people a way in which we can achieve reparations, and as much pushback as we have had, it's very, very practical. It's something that people have started doing already. And I'm just thinking about something that you touched on just now about the whole idea of identity and ownership, and what people from the African diaspora and people in Africa itself should feel about who they are. And for far too long, that identity has been overshadowed by inequality, and all that inequality stemming from slavery, stemming from colonialism, stemming from the looting and the plunder and the neo-colonialism that has followed, which actually says that there is no need to return things that have been stolen. If we're to truly, we talk about anti-racism, we talk about ending racism, if we're truly to do that, there are many ways in which we have to look at doing it. And one of those is about bringing about that equality, bringing about that respect. And we're never going to have that respect as people, no matter where we live as Black people, whether we live in the West, whether we live in Africa or the Caribbean, no matter where we live, we're never going to have that respect unless the governments that enslaved, that colonized, show that respect. And they're only going to show that respect when they start to do things like giving back artifacts, because the idea of reparations to me has always been one of equality. In the past, we've seen where people have given reparations is where they believe that these individuals are their equals. We are not perceived as equals, and that's why this issue persists. That's why you can turn around and say, we're not going to give you, we'll loan you your items back, we'll give you replicas, you can't take care of it properly. All of these really I think disgraceful kind of ways of speaking to people, speaking to Black people about what they own. Now, a lot of people have looked at this and just as you touched on again and said, well, why are we looking at this issue when there are so many other things happening? What morally, it's the right thing to do. If you are somebody that believes in human rights, if you're someone that believes in equality and justice, it's absolutely the right thing to do. Literally the meaning of the word reparations, to repair that relationship, to repair that equality. But even if you don't believe in the moral aspects of it, you have to see that the practical aspects of it and the diplomacy and the foreign affairs element. The UK, in my view, has recently committed what I would call a monumental act of self-harm, and that is Brexit. We've cut ties with our long-standing trading partners in the EU. And right now we're going out and we're seeking new trade agreements. So for those people that don't look at it for the moral reasons, they really need to look at it for the political reasons, and to say the UK needs friends in the world right now, and it's not going to make these friends, it's not going to keep these friends, it's not going to keep these good relations if it continues to treat some of the economies in the world that are booming like they are still their subjects. And that's another very practical way of looking at it. So if you cannot see the moral reasons for it, please actually see the practical and political reasons from what the UK should be doing. But I'm really encouraged by the discussions that have happened. We thought it would be good to have this meeting in the first instance to introduce what it is that Afford are going to be doing in particular in terms of this strand of work. And we look forward to seeing what we can produce through the hearings, and then eventually put down as policy. But we'll of course keep everybody informed of the other strands of work also, and we hope that people continue to contribute and get involved in the discussion as much as they have today. Thank you so much for your patience and listening to this awful bell on occasions.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Belle. Thanks for hosting. It's been a great session.
Thanks for
you.
hosting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet everyone. Bye.
Thank you to the participants
Thank
as
you.
well. Thank you.